I strongly encourage and invite anyone who does political YouTubing or live streaming to give it a shot, to expand outside the bounds of their audience, to try working with people with whom they don't necessarily agree. Not everyone, you're gonna have standards or boundaries, but you know, we don't want to be insular because that's how we lose and they win.
So first thing I want to address is that this panel was organized by Progressive Victory and Brianna Wu. And Brianna has had COVID and got sicker again this morning, and she tested positive. So she has been incredible in leading the construction of this and a lot of the events that have happened this week leading up to this point, which may come up in this conversation. And so we're here to carry this on, this panel, but she's greatly missed. My name is Sam. I'm the project director of Progressive Victory, which Brianna and I have been working together on setting this up. And we're just really excited to bring together a bunch of the content creators who've been some of the most prominent voices on the left, the liberal left axis in the progressive content space, and have been coming together this week to meet with a lot of people in DC and the Baltimore area, and are coming now to this panel to talk about how we can come together and bridge divides to make an impact in politics, especially in the 2024 election. So I guess I'd love to just have you all go down the line and introduce yourselves and what type of content you usually produce.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Vigeland. I'm the co-host of The Majority Report. We're a daily news show. We cover politics live every weekday at 12 Eastern. I co-host it with the legend that is Sam Cedar. He's pretty great. And I'm biased, but I think we're the best daily political talk show out there, just in terms of substance. When you're trying to look at things from the left, having guests on, it's sometimes a little boring, a little bit dry. But I think that wonky stuff is really important. The details are important. And yeah, if you haven't watched, I'd encourage everybody to check it out, The Majority Report.
I'm Vosh, and I go by Vosh, and I'm on the channel called Vosh, so I keep it nice and simple. And I talk politics, and I talk a lot of cultural and social issues too. I think they're very intertwined, and I think that what we've seen increasingly in the past few years, especially now more than ever, is that politics is a social issue in the sense that people's politics are derivative of the intimate personal problems they face in their day-to-day lives. So touching on those is incredibly helpful when it comes to reaching out to them and trying to convince them of a different perspective, and ignoring them is death knell. So that's what I try to focus on.
My name is Stephen Bunnell. My YouTube channel is called Destiny, a name that I picked up from my days of being a professional StarCraft 2 player. That's kind of stuck around since then. I cover the news from kind of like a center-left to far-left perspective, depending on who you are, with a big focus on critical thought and scholarly analysis. I try to read a little bit past the headlines. We try to do a lot of research. Rather than reading about a case, we'll read the actual indictments. Rather than reading about a Supreme Court decision, we'll try to read the actual opinions from the judges. And I try to encourage people to hear people from different areas of the political spectrum without instantly assuming that they're evil or out to get them. And I try to encourage everybody to be reflective of their own beliefs so that they don't come at these political conversations with too much unneeded aggression.
What is it that you think there's like a lot of wedges that are being driven right now, on the left, and what you think started that off and why it continues today?
Well, I think that, honestly, division on the left is not necessarily the worst thing sometimes. Like, people ask that question a lot, and I think it's just inherent to being on the left. Part of it's having principles. So the reason that the right is able to coalesce in ways that the left is not is, one, because they are also aligned behind capital in ways that the left is not. And it's pretty easy to regress to the mean for them and essentially just serve capitalism, and it's fine being nationalists or racist as long as you are protecting the power structure and the hierarchies that exist. When it comes to the left, there is infighting because a lot of people have principles and they don't want to stand aside alongside certain things that are deemed unacceptable. Now, there are times when it goes too far, 100%. But I think that the fact that there's an adversarial relationship within the left adversarial is not the right word, but I think the fact that there are these open discussions and debates, that's actually a strength, and it means that we're thinking critically about issues, and I think that that's indicative of kind of what we're trying to achieve today as well.
I agree completely. And it's worth noting, of course, that leftist infighting is left tradition. It's been happening for as long as the left has existed. It's seemingly unavoidable. It's tragic, but it's like gravity. It just pulls us down. And there's only so much we can do about it. I think the key is understanding that through all the disagreement and fighting and personal bickeries, there are things we can focus on to productively move forward. The key here is that it's a political space, not a social space. Disliking people in a social sense, thinking they are rude or boorish or even have some bad opinions, doesn't prevent you from working with them on issues of critical import. I think even like AOC at a national level has discussed efforts to work with Republican congressmen towards specific policy. And, they disagree on 99% of things, but if they work on the 1%, then, that's something. I only hope for a future in the online left where there's a little bit more constructivity behind all of it, because I feel like we're a bit lacking in that regard.
And let me just add one thing, too. Like, the online left is not representative of the left, right? Like, we are, there's a tendency to overinflate our importance. We are not that important. We're just not. I'm here to communicate issues. I don't feel that we should think of ourselves that way, honestly. Like, I'm here to communicate issues. I want to bring people on my platform that are actually doing the work, that are on the ground, that are advocates. That's the role that I see in this political space. And so, yeah, there's infighting with media personalities, but that's mostly about branding and stuff like that. What matters really are the people that are doing the work and organizing and working together. And I just think it's important to make that distinction between influencers and speakers and people who have microphones versus people who maybe don't get the attention that they deserve.
I wish I brought a notebook with me because I think I disagree with almost every single thing that was just said. I think that infighting happens on the left and the right. I think it's silly to say that infighting is something that only happens on the left or is exclusive to the left. I mean, just a while ago, we saw a huge split with Steven Crowder fighting with the Daily Wire, for instance. We see huge schisms in the Republican Party with them being unsure of how they're going to proceed when 70 to 80% of the party is like ride or die for Donald Trump, who stands in stark contrast to the actual Republican establishment. The idea that, I mean, we see even Donald Trump, the guy who, is the leader of the Republican Party, literally fights with every single other person in the Republican Party and his own cabinet and his own attorney generals and every other part of his thing. So I don't think infighting is unique to any side. I agree that fighting and debate is good and having conversations is good, but I find that on the left, that's not what happens. And these fights don't originate out of principle, and they don't conduct themselves in a way that is productive. Instead, what they end up being is like an endless place to serve your own ego and to strawman, attack, cancel, destroy people that you end up disagreeing with. So while it would be really great if it did exist on the left where we could have conversations and disagreements, what actually happens is there is a party line that you kind of have to toe right now on the left if you're a progressive. And if you deviate in any way, size, shape, or form, you're essentially Hitler 2.0. And I don't think there's anything productive there. I don't think anything good happens there. And then on the end, the last point that Emma brought up, as much as I like to say, like 10 years ago, Twitter is not real life, I just sat across from Ro Khanna, who said that he didn't even have AOC's number, and they were conducting official business on Twitter DMs. So it seems like every day Twitter is becoming more and more like real life, where a lot of the policy, Donald Trump was literally announcing policy, making decisions from Twitter. We've got politicians like Bernie Sanders having to disavow his fan base because of their behavior on Twitter. And we've got a lot of interactions online that are merging more with real life than they ever had before. I don't think it's enough for influencers or entertainers to just throw their hands up and say, well, I just do entertainment. The work on the street is for the people on the street. I think that it is becoming increasingly more likely that people online are having a major influence on stuff that happens on the street or in academia or in other places. And I think we need to be aware of that responsibility, and we need to play into it accordingly.
I think I actually agree strongly with that last bit. There's a TikTok I saw from a creator called Chris Raygun. It was funny, but the gist of it was essentially he was calling out a number of other YouTubers who he strongly believed had received an email, like him, from a conservative organization offering them money in exchange for them being willing to push certain talking points. He didn't accept it. He feels that a bunch of other folks did. There is a really strong synchronicity there. It feels in a lot of right-leaning spaces where there is this underlying cohesion. You know, and you spoke to it being like the bridge of capital, and I think that capital, if nothing, binds people. If you can pay people,
the money binds those right-wing influencers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, really obvious.
How much money do all the left-leaning influencers make? I mean, like, it's not, none of us up here are poor, right? We all make a lot of money up here, right? I think some of the largest podcasts, I know the Majority Report does really good on Patreon, and I've watched your channel does good. Like, it's not like we're sitting up here broke, like we're on the street in rags, like, listen to a fellow leftist. Like, we make a lot of money here, too.
No, but that's the difference, right? We make money, but the circuits through which we make money incentivize, in many cases, drama and infighting. One of the best ways to get a lot of money or prestige or clout as an influencer is to manufacture drama. That's the case for drama YouTubers, and it's the case for political YouTubers. And there's a critical difference between wealth acquired through that means and wealth that you receive from a different organization on the condition that you adhere to a certain set of values and not broach certain topics. And I think that that difference, now that's not something we want to replicate, right? I'm not suggesting the solution for the left is to set up like dark money PACs and start funding everyone.
But I think it's the same problem. I think the reason why we look at the right and we say, oh, well, they take money from PACs or organizations, so what is the bad thing about that? The bad thing is that you might have an influencer that's not representing their true, honest beliefs, but they're representing the people that are behind them financially. But I think the exact same type of audience capture happens on the left. Every one of us up here has made a decision about what topic to cover or not cover because we know that our audience might respond in a certain way for it. And when you literally have paying subscriptions that are riding on your opinion on like a certain breaking news topic, I don't think it's enough to say like, well, you know, I'm funded by my audience, therefore I don't have to worry about audience capture, when I think all the exact same problems that people that are bought by corporate interests can exist on the right, the exact same thing can happen on the left with audience capture that want to hear a certain political opinion as well.
No, I don't disagree. But it is a difference in how that capture takes place, don't you agree? Because if the capture is from your audience, the incentive there is to make the audience happy, whereas the incentive in the case of sort of other money would be to keep your benefactors happy, and they might have a much more structured and specific set of goals. If you're getting funded by a conservative PAC, they don't care about drama. Like, they're not interested in like a video that gets a bunch of views because you trash another conservative. They're trying to toe a line here, you know? So we're not trying to replicate that. But I think that it takes a certain level of discipline in order to get comparable results in terms of audience engagement and cohesion. And to that extent, a lot of work needs to be done.
So I'm hearing a lot of conversation here about the incentives in the space are lead toward conflict and confrontation, which I think, you know, any observer can see that that is an angle, right? So the question, I think, before all of you is, given those incentives, how can there be any kind of cooperation between people who are incentivized to a certain extent by the way that the space works and the platform algorithms themselves to create conflict between one another?
I think that's certainly a good point. I mean, debates and things like that, but there's always an audience for that, right? And I don't know if you can get around that incentive except to just not engage in it in the same way. But debate and like mockery of certain people, I think, is justified. You know, I enjoy, and I think it's actually worthwhile, mocking Steven Crowder, mocking Ben Shapiro, mocking Matt Walsh, Tim Pool. These people are worthy of derision. And it's important, I think, when an impressionable, like 15-year-old turns on their computer and Googles and maybe gets into some Andrew Tate or Tim Pool wormhole, that then the next video up on their algorithm is potentially me and Sam saying, this guy's a loser, like, and this is why, and we're gonna getting a call. We are going to make evidentiary claims as to why that is the case, because like there are a lot of people who are feeling alienated, who want connection and seek it through the internet, and they get sucked into situations where they start to go down alt-right pipelines and things like that. So I think it's less about the undercutting the debate element and more just directing it at the people who are doing the most harm in society.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't think anybody would have as much of a problem. I mean, some people will still argue over optics or whatever, but if all of the vitriol and ire were aimed at people like Stephen Crowder or Tim Pool, I mean, I think people would complain probably a lot less, because I think a lot of people on the left feel that rightfully so, a lot of these guys deserve it. And a lot of those guys throw it at people at the left all the time too. You know, it's hard to be nice to conservatives when, you know, their largest TikTok accounts are obsessing over outing every single LGBT teacher as a groomer, right? I'm super empathetic towards bashing conservatives when they need it. I think the issue comes whenever there are these slight divides on the left, where these people, instead of being able to engage in critical conversation and defend our ideas in the ways that would, you know, be best to defend them, we end up just outing them and saying, we're not going to have these conversations anymore. We're not going to, we're above debating, you know, trans women in sports, or we're above debating whether or not all of white supremacy, you know, ruins all of society. We're above debating Roe v. Wade or any type of abortion or affirmative action. I think not only do we lose the ability to strengthen the arguments on these sides, from we have to argue with people in the middle or people on the right, which normal people do have to contend with because we all live together, like it or not, we also lose the ability to kind of strengthen our own positions and have our own path forward, where we're more research backed, we're more academically focused, we're being more honest with our arguments, because instead of actually testing the metal of any of our arguments and fortifying them and reinforcing them, we end up just outing somebody for simple disagreements. And I think we're seeing that, like, that has had, like, drastically horrible real-world impacts. I think of the University of Washington saying that they're not going to walk back a positive headline on a trans study because I think it'll look bad. Or I think of, like, all of the fighting that the left does, not to call out any particular people, but like with Jesse Singal, who writes a lot of articles about trans-related issues. Rather than people being able to engage with any of these issues honestly, with good arguments, and to, you know, reinforce our arguments or attack the other side, it just instantly becomes an outing of whatever, you know, transphobic, ism, whatever you can call the other person, and then you just kind of move on and forget about it.
But Singal is transphobic, and the thing is that he can have liberal and progressive opinions on other things, but his opinions are transphobic. So you can make claims about individual opinions, and no one's saying, like, you're never allowed to vote Democrat again, Jesse. You're out of the club. But that those opinions and an over focus on the sister myth or things like that is a transphobic impulse. I think that it just makes people principled and clear-eyed.
So looking at somebody like Singal, how would we say that that's like a transphobic person? Somebody that clearly aligns with most left-leaning things, is clearly in favor of most forms of trans therapy. Is it because he takes a critical look at some research that we just write him off as transphobic?
Well, I don't think that I don't know. I don't think that the analysis of the sister myth from his end is in good faith. But I mean, I'm not here to debate Jesse Singal. He's like a myth. The fact that there's this overwhelming number of trans people who are desisting, and that doctors are pushing this onto people, I think that what you cover is just as important and what you choose to focus on is just as important as what you say, and he overemphasizes these case-by-case claims that undercut the solidarity that we should have with trans people generally.
So I can agree that it's important to focus on what you decide to cover. I think that can be as important as how you cover something. But I mean, at this point, Jesse's beat is essentially writing about trans-related issues. I find it unfortunate that on the left we've decided that if you take a critical look at trans stuff, which is, for better or for worse, been like the national discourse for the last 2 years because Republicans have no other platform, that we're not allowed to have somebody that focuses on, you know, the reality that there are some people that desist. There are some people that get on these medications that maybe don't need to be. Instead of even being able to look at that, we say that type of focus is inappropriate. But if you want to talk about, like, police killing unarmed black men, regardless of what the numbers there, we can have a hyper fixation on that, such to the point that we even cover these stories in dramatically incorrect ways that leads to additional rioting or other downstream bad consequences.
The coverage is commensurate with the fact that black people are much more likely to be killed or abused by police, and that is why there is that emphasis. Trans people, 90% of kids, there's a study in pediatrics, 90% of kids after 5 years who socially transition continue with gender-affirming care. The very small amount who return to their birth gender or whatever that they were assigned at birth, that's like something like 3-ish%, and there's no real surgery involved there. That's usually kids under the age of 10 before hormone therapy has even started. So my coverage of trans issues is proportionate to the amount of kids that are actually transitioning and happy with their transition. For me, I think that that's my responsibility as opposed to focusing on edge cases, because I'm not a journalist in the same way that somebody writing for the Washington Post or the New York Times is. I'm somebody that is covering what I think is important, and its emphasis and the emphasis that I choose to focus on is hopefully aligned with the proportionality of the problem.
And I think that's super fair, and I would agree, and I would say the same thing. I don't generally cover a lot of DeSister stuff too. I don't even really like talking to DeSisters, which I think is fair for a variety of reasons. Right. But the issue here isn't what you choose to cover. The issue is deriding somebody else as transphobic because they want to cover it. And we can say until we're blue in the face that, oh, well, the data points in one direction, and like clearly all of these people are completely wrong. But then you look across Europe where they have stopped some of these trans treatments, and then you look at in the United States, there are some stories that come up that are questionable, and people in the United States, especially parents, will look at these stories and they'll go, okay, well, people on the left say that it's all fake. A whole bunch of people seem to be disagreeing, and the only people that want to have these conversations are people on the right. On the left, you can't even talk about it because people like you will say, oh, well, those people are transphobic.
So I think we've touched on something really important here, which is the difference between a willingness to critically examine a subject and engage with certain people on said subject. So I firmly believe that no topic should be off the table when it comes to debating or arguing or discussing its potential virtues. I think that that's always valid. You know, I don't see this as much today, but there was a period of time during the prominence of the alt-right where you would, if you had any opinion online for any length of time, you would be thrown without your consent into a debate about race science. It's still to an extent true on Twitter these days, though thankfully it seems less so. Maybe it'll come back in style. I don't know. I think that when it comes to issues like race and criminology, well, I have a background in criminology. You have to get into it, right? On an academic level, you can't ignore it or turn your head from it. Lots of interesting stuff there. Valid conclusions to derive. But sometimes, when the folks who want to talk about it are very obviously and persistently acting in bad faith, the question is, to what extent can you engage? And that's the critical difference. I see lots of folks on the left who just plain don't want to talk about some subjects, and I think that's lazy. You know, I think that if nothing else, they have to be engaged with in the abstract. And on the other hand, of course, there is a massive right-wing grift circuit of people who have been proven wrong 5,000 times on every conceivable issue. Like Ben Shapiro consistently gets owned on the same talking points regarding trans people, but he's been repeating the same ones for 7 years now, unchanging, not reflecting any shift in the national dialogue, because it doesn't matter whether or not he's been owned on them. So I think that this is actually core. This is critical to the difficulties in inter-left engagement, because the divide between what do we talk about and who do we talk to is really socially important, and it gets a lot of folks worked up.
Well, and I think that the emotion involved here is highly important to examine, right? You are all humans with emotions as you're having these debates, and you're reacting in the moment as you're talking live on camera, which is very unique for the type of content that you produce. And your audiences are also reacting live, right? So when people get involved in this and they start to identify with this, it can sometimes. How does that affect the tenor of the debate? So you can have these discussions, right? But how does the emotions getting involved and the audience is starting to identify with these things start to affect the tenor of how that creates the relationships and affects the relationships between creators?
I'm not sure. I think my content's maybe a little bit different than what you guys do, because I'm not a streamer in the technical sense, but we do have open IMs and open calls on the majority report. Or actually, you have to become a member and then you can IM, but you can call in no matter who you are. At least for me, and I'm still learning, like it has made me a much, I think, more engaged critical thinker having that audience interaction.
Yeah, I think that the emotional tenor is actually really critical, because the debates and all the political engagement online by themselves, I think, inspire in your average audience member actually a really negative, like angry, almost nihilism, where they get so disconnected from the modes by which people engage in real political change that they just watch and consume a lot of content and get really upset. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so delighted to work with the Progressive Victory people.
Oh, great, love. That's very professional.
Thank you. Didn't even try it.
Oh, yeah, that's a professional.
I'll just say, literally hundreds of times in emails, DMs, whatever, where you have people who, they watch the content, they like and they agree, but who could help themselves from feeling a little bit of despair considering the state of the world today? There's a lot to worry about, like legitimately, even for people with a lot of self-control. And I think a lot of that is amplified by the fact that they consume all this content and then they go to sleep. They have dinner, there's no outlet for it. You go and you canvass or do phone banking. And I think that for a lot of these folks, they feel a million times better because now they are part of a constructive solution. In fact, not just a solution, but in many cases, the solution, Workable results are, if you really turn an election, if you work for something good, that's something you can point to on your deathbed. You keep that with you forever. That's a positivity that can't be eclipsed by any specific online debate or bad news article or whatever else. So channeling that, trying to push people towards that, hey, in addition to all this content, touch grass, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think online audiences make a lot of things worse. They have the potential to make some things better. Obviously, any minor disagreement you have with somebody, an online audience is going to amplify that a millionfold. Sometimes even if disagreements are non-existent, they'll amplify nothing into a millionfold. It makes people a lot more vitriolic, a lot more quick to anger, a lot more hyperbolic. I just described myself in 3 words on Twitter. Audiences can definitely amplify and cause a lot of negative stuff to happen online. Kind of piggybacking on the back of what Vosh said, I think the biggest problem with a lot of online political discourse is that the engagement starts and stops when you are on and off Twitter. That it feels like it's very hard for people to translate a lot of what they do online into some type of real political action. And I think on YouTube and on stream, I think we have probably the most engaged audiences of any media forum that exists today. More than television, more than talk radio, more than anything, our audiences will watch us for hours and hours every day, or tune into, the Majority Report every single day, and they follow us on Twitter and on other social medias. And I think that relationship, if we're going to take all the negatives of like people fighting online and the edutainment and everything else, if we're going to take all of that, we should also do some of the positives, which is mobilizing people to real-world political activism.
Yeah, so you all have been involved in these debates for a long, long time. And you have histories with other people in the space and with each other. And that can, I think you're talking about how that can isolate. So, and yet you're all making the case that the audiences are engaged and want to get something done. So what does it take for you? What do you think the ingredients are that are necessary to still engage in this type of debates and content that you create, but also have constructive relationships to mobilize your audiences for better change?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a question about like our personal psychology a little bit there. So, my therapist should be watching this, honestly. Yeah, I guess for me, I've had very few friends in the political online space. I have a few. Most of my social life is with like my friends from high school and college, and so I'm able to at least have like an emotional outlet outside of anything that has to do with work, right? Where I can stand for what I believe in. I can do the best that I can to advocate for the policies that I believe in, and it doesn't become as personal, hopefully, for me. But it's an ongoing, thing you battle with, obviously.
Oh yeah, sure. It's difficult all around, especially because when you're live streaming, you generally aren't going off a script. So there's a lot of interplay there, both with perceived authenticity from the audience, and on your side, you're kind of, not to say that every live streamer is just like an open book or whatever, but there's definitely more of that there, I feel. I think that people want to go out and canvass and phone bank. I think people that want to feel productive. I think that it seems as though there are barriers. I know that a lot of my audience is relatively young and probably doesn't have that much experience with organized political action, which means that to them, going to a town hall or running for city council or whatever, it's like an abstract, unthinkable, it's archaic. It doesn't feel like something they have access to, when of course in reality they do. I told this anecdote quite recently, but it was recently found, I think there was just some look at it, but about 60% of the book bans in this country, like some folks getting mad there was a gay kid in a book in a high school somewhere. About 60% of those done by 11 people. Just 11 people. They don't live in the county. They just call around. They're highly dedicated. They make significant changes. If you can sell people on the potential and the possibilities and actually going out there and doing something, absolutely critical. Also, it's a good social opportunity. Nobody goes outside anymore. Nobody makes friends. Everyone feels empty. You know, going out there. I get a lot of emails from people saying they made some new friends while canvassing. That's sweet. I love that for them.
That's good advice, and I just want to piggyback on that because it is a good point. When you bring up those school boards, why the right is, this is where the left can learn a lesson here, why they're so effective at essentially having a very high floor for political engagement with their base is that they activate people on such visceral local levels. If you're going to your school board meeting to yell about genderqueer being in the library at your school and you're running for your school board, you're voting Republican in state races, you're voting Republican in federal races, you're organizing. Like, they understand how to make the politics so personal that in the end, like, your crazy uncle is screaming at a teacher or a superintendent as they drive out of the parking lot, right? Because they become so radicalized by what the right's project is. The left doesn't have like reactionary impulses that they can instill in their base to do the same thing, but that is something that we can improve on. When you make politics personal to people's lives, they're much more likely to be activated in a variety of different ways. So in terms of my advice or something I'd like to see, that's something I think we share, Vosh.
I feel like it is astounding to me to think that the left doesn't produce that type of vitriolic reactionary behavior when we just came off of the largest riots in the history of like the entire United States with the whole BLM stuff. To say that we can't activate people on a local level is astounding to me. I think we absolutely did activate people on a local level. But the problem was that the influencers and the leaders in charge, instead of pointing towards good policy decisions, I think when it comes to being an influencer, being a voice, being a speaker, sometimes it becomes more of an exercise in ego, and then all the horrible things that come along with that, virtue signaling, infighting, excising people that we don't like, standing in front of big crowds, collecting a lot of money and doing nothing. We get all these people together, we get them riled up, we get them rioting, but then what are the policy aims behind it? Like, we have the same problem with Occupy Wall Street. What were the policy aims with that? There was nothing. Like, corporations aren't people in what, a tax sense? Like, it didn't even make sense. You know, and the same thing with the BLM stuff. Like, what were the policy goals after that? Some people, sad enough, actually tried to fight with certain policy goals. I remember 8 Can't Wait was one of those, and so many people on the left made fun of those people. They were like, oh, you can't, this 8 Can't Wait isn't blah, blah, blah. We need to abolish the police. We need to defund the police. Every place where they tried that, it basically failed, and everything was reverted, like, in a year or two. I think that the left can activate people on a local level. I think they've done it. We all just watched them do it for, an entire season of rioting. I think the problem is we just don't point at effective policy goals, because I think really it relates back to the first question. It feels like sometimes when I look at people on the left that do online politics, it feels like it's an exercise in ego flexing and financial furthering and these types of like clout building activities, rather than what are the things that I can do to activate my audience to go to a local election and vote. Being anti-electoralism is not going to get your people to show up at the polls. Or what are some actionable policies that I can get my people to support, like banning trans books at a library? That's a lot easier to do than saying we need to usher in the new era of anti-capitalism, or we're not going to do anything until we have it's not even 15 an hour now, it's like 20 or 25 an hour that people push for. I feel like we're just so bad at having realistic aims for our policies, and then we're so bad at activating people on an electoral sense, because every single problem that we talk about is like the entire world. Like, if you look at the right, you look at people like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, what do they say? Go to the gym, clean your room, be misogynistic, okay? These are things that any young man can do, okay? Very easy, you can implement these in every single part of your life. And then what are people on the left saying? Well, we have to fight against white supremacy, capitalism, and whatever other like grand narrative, anti-LGBT, like, it's always these grand external problems that an individual can take absolutely no control of their life over. And I think that we need to do a better job at aiming people in realistic directions towards good evidence-backed policies.
Yeah, I think that it's an uphill walk towards that. I think it's easier when you're on the right because the entire COVID pandemic situation can be boiled down to, execute Dr. Fauci. Like that's legitimately touted as some kind of like end goal for a lot of conservative commentators, or, arrest him or throw away the key. Whereas obviously any critical analysis of the situation and the actors involved is so complicated that no single individual could probably wrap their head around the whole thing. The trick is, and I agree with that fundamentally, about centering goals and being productive, because, some people have had criticisms of capitalism. I've heard rumors of this. But it is true that shouting that at folks doesn't give them much in the way of specific instruction. There are ways you can hit on concrete points, but they rarely feel as satisfying. And there's something about the, I don't know if it's like a utopian impulse or something, but there is something, the right-wingers, in many cases it seems, they will hyper-fixate on very local, very specific stuff. Here is a teacher, they say, who wore a rainbow shirt to class, and people get worked up for this, they're screaming in the comment section, and this, in many cases, leads to harassment, doxing threats, bomb threats, whatever else. This is content for them, but it's so specific. And then you go over on the left and it's, here's video essay number 73 on like the history of Spanish anarchism and the actual reason why we can't decommodify housing. And it's good, I'll watch it, but it's not the same kind of content, and it doesn't lead to the same kinds of behavior.
Well, I agree with you. I think that it's a little inherent to the left, right? But at the same time, I think we can draw a distinction between the left in that way and the Democratic Party. And despite Biden's low approval ratings right now, it's something very unique that we're seeing. It's not tethered to how Democrats are doing in special elections or how they did in the midterms, where the Democrats overperformed. It's a very interesting thing, because normally if a president had that low approval ratings, the Democrats should have gotten smacked in the 2022 midterms, and they didn't. And why is that? Negative partisanship right now against Republicans is really damn high. People associate them with Trump, they associate them with chaos, and most crucially, they associate them with being the party that took away abortion rights. So when talking about issues that are as personal and as poignant for people in their own individual lives, abortion is number one. And I think, finally, some Democratic pollsters and consultants are getting the memo there, and 24 will be the election about abortion. And that's a glimmer of hope, at least for me, from an electoral perspective, that making that issue more personal could translate positively to polling.
So you are
for the polling booths, I should say.
So you all are drawing a really strong distinction between organizing in the social space and organizing in the electoral space, and how a lot of people are being drawn to the anti-electoral fringes, and both on the right, and then we also have a lot of tankies that are coming up on the left. And so, how do you, as a content creator who's in this space, focus your audiences on remaining hopeful about electoral politics in the face of that?
I think that there's always going to be a distinction between these spaces, the social and the political, purely because people are looking for different things. People wake up in the morning and they want to talk to a friend. They don't wake up and I want to canvas. Canvassing stuff, but rewarding. Go do it. With regards to how to control these, I think that things tilt in the wrong direction if you overemphasize the value of these. I think that the Democrats, like the institutional Democratic Party, has done a pretty poor job of cultural capture. I think that most of the cultural capture on the left is kind of this decentralized, artists and community leaders that have kind of built an orbit around them, and the Dems themselves just exist. Whereas the Republicans, it feels, have a fairly strong control over the shape that their associated spaces take. But on the other side of things, right, in terms of direct political action, you have an entirely different set of impulses. How do you get people to actually go out there and work? If you overemphasize the social, people treat it all like it's social. And all of a sudden, you don't want to do any electoral work because you don't personally like all the people involved in a given group. I see this at the DSA all the time. Yeah, I'll complain. I heard that one DSA recruiter was actually asking potential joiners whether or not they liked me as a disqualifying question. Now, I'm permitted to complain about that. Very silly. I'm slightly flattered, but altogether, I think that's perfectly endemic of the issue, right? Like, here's this social attribute. Are you worthy to be a political accomplice? If we can do a better job of cutting that and splitting that, I think that it would be infinitely easier to mobilize people towards electoralism without making them feel like they're slaves to Joe Biden, and we could get a lot more work done.
I think the balance is way too far on the activism side right now. I think people need to understand that if you don't vote, you don't matter. If you do not go out and actually vote at the end of the day for a politician, all of the tweets, all of the Facebook posts, all of the marches and the riots and the hanging out with the friends and whatever, none of that matters. At the end of the day, more than appealing to a lobbyist, more than getting likes on a tweet, more than anything else, what a politician wants is to get reelected. And you can be the loudest, most retweeted person on the entire internet, but if at the end of the day, you or your group of friends or your generation or your particular block of voters doesn't show up to the polls, then at the end of the day, a politician is not crafting policies for you, and they shouldn't be. The goal of any politician is to appease their constituents and fight for reelection. And the way that they fight for reelection is by appeasing the voters that are actually showing up and going to the polls. So when you look around the United States and you're like, why do we still have 3-strike laws? Or why do we have cops busting down on marijuana so much? Or why is all this such bullshit? And then you go to the polls and you see a whole bunch of 75-year-old affluent white people. Oh, well, it's probably because they don't really care too much about what goes on in our jails because they're not getting arrested. That's just not in their purview. That's not part of their lives. So I agree that both sides are important. It's not enough just to vote. If you want to be politically active, then there is a value to the activism. There is a value to the retweets. There is a value to the YouTube videos. There's a value to everything that we participate in our day-to-day life as like political peoples. But if it's not connected at the end of the day to some sort of voting action, no amount of retweets are ever bringing back Roe v. Wade. Putting Trump in the White House is what got rid of it.
Yeah, I'll say that I think it's a little more complicated just because, yes, everybody should vote. And that is important, and vote Democrat. Because the other side, in primaries...
Be specific.
In primaries, vote for the more, progressive person, and then when it comes time, vote Democrat. But, we do see the limits sometimes of like what politicians will respond to, and a lot of that has to do with interest groups. The biggest example is comprehensive gun control in this country. There's not an issue that any of us can all agree on in the United States of America, but universal background checks, things like that, it's like 92%. Bans on assault weapons is up there in the high 80s and things like that. And the thing is that those people are voting, right? And a lot of them are suburbanite moms, and that's a coveted group that politicians do covet and want to respond to. The problem in those instances, though, is that there are lobbying groups, there is corruption involved, and so it's not necessarily as, unfortunately in this country, we don't live in a direct democracy in the way that we should. Politicians have other people that they answer to, and that is a part of the broader fight against runaway neoliberal capitalism, because it's important to cut down on the ability for industry to dominate politics in that way, so our democracy is just even a fraction more representative.
I think that when people talk about the special interest groups and the lobbying, I think that there are edge issues where they can have a big impact on. But when we talk about issues like gun control, I see this happen all the time when people talk about the polling data. People will say things like, there's 92% for this particular thing. There's never 92% for support for anything in this country. That is absolutely not true. I think what happens is people will poll on a very broad issue like universal background checks. But then when you actually get into the weeds of what does that mean, well, if you've ever had an antidepressant, are you forbidden from ever buying a gun? If you've ever had a certain type of criminal charge, or the red flag laws, or any of these other types of ways that you could potentially prohibit somebody from having a gun, you see support for those particular policies absolutely fall off a cliff. The exact same thing happened when we talked so much several years ago about universal health care, where if you polled people and you asked them, would you support the United States government providing every citizen with some form of free health care? I think that polled, I want to say, north of 80%. But when you replace that same same question with, would you support the United States government replacing all private healthcare with their own? The support for that dropped to around 25%. And I think that sometimes because we don't get very granular with our questions, we kind of delude ourselves into this world where we think there's broad American consensus around these certain political opinions, and it's not happening. Why? And then we look and we blame the lobbyists or the special interest groups. But the reality is it's very rare that we have broad consensus around anything today because we're so divided. I think that we look at Congress and we look at how ineffective they are, and we look at all the divides in this country and we say, like, well, we want to blame capitalism, we want to blame neoliberalism, we want to blame Elon Musk or Jordan Peterson, but the reality is we are just historically incredibly divided right now, and I think that our government is accurately representing those divisions in our communities.
I think that there's some nuance to this. Consistently, we see that people tend to be a little bit more leftward when it comes in referendums than the politicians they actually vote for. Like in Kansas, for instance, the referendum to change their state constitution to allow for a ban on abortion did not pass, not even close, despite it being Kansas, full of folks who voted for Donald Trump, who pledged he would get rid of Roe v. Wade. I think that it's really difficult to sort of bridge that gap. The Democrats are proportionally unpopular considering their policies. And a lot of that has to do with cultural capture. I think a lot of it also has to do with capital. I think there's an excellent John Oliver segment on how a ton of local news in America is basically just all owned by the same company, and they reliably repeat, skewed talking points in a way that sometimes isn't entirely factually inaccurate, but definitely distorts the information. We see them in, national level too. CNN recently had a CEO change who just said he wanted to bring more right-leaning content into the network in order to sort of broaden the appeal. And unfortunately, judging by the articles that were written after that I read, broadening the network seemed to mean lying more, or at least being more wrong in implication. It's tough, right? Like, how do you actually get through all that? But if there's anything we can agree on, and I hope we do, because we're here with the fine folks of Progressive Victory, is that none of this matters if you don't vote. It is like having a nice classic car and then not changing the oil, wheels, or brakes when you need to. It is fundamental. It is the bedrock of everything you do on top of it. The most effective protests in the world would not do anything if they were supervised by far-right politicians. They would just kill or arrest all the people who did it. Stonewall, kill or arrest. Black Lives Matter, kill or arrest. Civil rights movement, kill or arrest. You need to have the right people in office, even for radical change to take effect, unless you're speaking to some kind of genuine revolutionary sentiment, which, good luck, I guess. It doesn't really seem to be the environment we live in right now. Doesn't seem to be a realistic venue for change at this time. I really think we should focus on the avenues we have before us.
Yeah, just to add something really quickly to that. One, I said this yesterday in our conversation, I believe at this point with Ro Khanna. When you're voting for Joe Biden, you're not voting for, like who you want to marry. This isn't The Bachelor. You're not voting, it's not a talent contest I know. It's not a personality contest. You're voting for the coalition he's going to bring into office, like Lena Khan, for example, one of the best FTC chairs that we've had in a really long time. Other cabinet officials who are going to make change in ways that you don't really see immediately, but that are important structurally, because when Republicans come in, they destroy, they gut, and it's much easier to destroy than it is to build back. And just to add to Vosh's point earlier, there are, it's interesting for people that want to learn about politics. They're polling, and I guess this is also Destiny's point too, the polling on issues in a vacuum doesn't necessarily matter, because people can agree on things in polls, but there's a difference between what people agree on and what motivates them to vote. Like, for example, polling on stuff like trans issues, it's muddled, and sometimes, honestly, it's a little bit like the left is in the minority when you look at some of those polls. But we saw in the 2022 midterms that the people that ran on transphobia basically universally lost, because while people may say in a poll, like, I don't really want, a trans person in my girls' track meet, right? Are they going to go out and vote on that? Not really. And there's no evidence that's shown that. And so that's also why I don't even think it's a problem to back up trans people very vociferously, because I don't really think it has any electoral consequences, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think you all are bringing up some good points. Destiny, you brought up just how divided the country feels right now. And there's divisions that we all have been talking about on stage that are within the current Democratic Party coalition and without. The Republicans are setting a really good example right now of how the divisions are on full display over there, and they're so divided they can't even govern among themselves right now. But the winners of electoral politics, I think, as you said, Destiny, are the ones who actually vote and are able to get a coherent group together that actually are willing to vote and actually do the outreach. And so what is it that you are looking for in 2024 to make sure that you are directing your audiences in the way that is going to be productive for creating that coalition, creating that coherent group that's actually going to be the winners, as opposed to the divided losers?
I think it's important to understand at the end of the day what your goals are. If your goal is to just grow an audience or make a lot of money or grow your clout online, that's one thing. If your goal is to effect some positive political change, that's another. And to accomplish that effective political change, you have to be willing to work with other people and to have alliances. You have to be able to look at a person who disagrees with you on an aspect of white supremacy and not just label them racist. You have to be able to look at somebody who might disagree with you about desisters and not just label them transphobic. You have to be able to look at people that have slightly differing political opinions with you and not write them off as being, normatively just as bad as the entire opposite end of the political spectrum. So, generally, I try my best, obviously. Nobody's perfect, least of all me. But I try when I'm reviewing other people's content to, be aware of hey, we might disagree on this, but we've got the same political ends. Or, hey, we disagree on this, but at the end of the day, remember who you're supposed to vote for. Or I might not like this guy's opinion on these things, but we align with most things. I think that's probably been my biggest disappointing thing about most of the kind of online political left, is you can take a group of people, if we had OkCupid political profiles, I think we'd be 80% plus lined up on most of our positions, but we fight we're part of former Yugoslavian nations trying to genocide each other. It's absolutely insane how similar some of the political beliefs could be, especially compared to our opposites, and then how vitriolic and deep the fighting is. Although, to be fair, without getting too deep into it, there are reasons why. There are psychological reasons why it hurts so much to disagree with somebody who's closer to you than farther from you. One of many reasons being that if a conservative walks up to you and a conservative says oh, you're a insert whatever, conservative insult against you, it doesn't really hurt because you don't really care what their opinion is of you. If you call me, this is being broadcast, I'm not in broadcast mode right now. There's a lot of bad things conservatives like to call you, okay? But at the end of the day, I don't really care what a conservative calls me. But somebody on the left calls me racist or transphobic or whatever. These are things that in my mind, I don't view myself that way. A conservative insulting me because we're diametrically opposed on our beliefs is fine. I'll even laugh about it. I don't care. But when somebody that's supposed to be kind of in a political alliance with me is saying that I'm completely different, yeah, I think that those types of insults hurt a lot more. And I think that's why the infighting happens so much. On the left and the right, it does as well online.
Yeah, this is a table of proud litcucks, okay? Can't take that from us. No, I think that it also speaks to the value of sort of multi-tiered organizations. It's pretty difficult, I think, for folks who interpersonally don't get along with each other to politically, work together just for purely social reasons, It's a matter of willpower. Progressive Victory makes it pretty easy for me to, for example, throw members of my audience at them. And I know that other folks are going there who maybe don't like them or me or whatever, but at least from what I've heard from the folks at Progressive Victory, it don't matter. When they're actually canvassing, phone banking or whatever, they're united in purpose. It works out great. Now, obviously, left infighting, everyone's experienced it if they've been in the left for any length of time. You see what it looks like. You know how vitriolic it can get. If you have participated in it to any extent, which I imagine a lot of us have, it can go so wrong so quickly. It's very bitter infighting and very purposeless too. Look, we can't fix people's brains, really. We can't socially correct everyone on the left magically, as nice as that would be. I think we can try to build ancillary spaces and communities, and we can try to shape our own communities to make them, if not perfect on this, at the very least conditionally productive. And conditional productivity, I'll tell you, that's a lot better than most live streamers and YouTubers can do. That's a high bar, all right, for that particular space. I strongly encourage and invite anyone who does political YouTubing or live streaming to give it a shot, to expand outside the bounds of their audience, to try working with people with whom they don't necessarily agree. Not everyone, you're gonna have standards or boundaries, but we don't want to be insular because that's how we lose and they win.
Yeah, I guess I'm struck by I feel as if we really just don't matter that much. Like, as YouTube personalities or Twitch personalities, I think it's just we have to be vessels to get people politically organized. And at least how I feel is the guests that I have on my show. When we have on somebody who is works in I don't know, like Astra Taylor, for example, we have on regularly with the Debt Collective. She is actively making change, working with the Biden administration to try to get student debt canceled. And that original cancellation that he did, that eventually the Supreme Court got overturned, that's a direct result of what they did, what the Debt Collective and Astra Taylor did. Like that's, I guess, what I view my role as, is using the fact that some people like to hear my voice or hear me talk or watch our show as a way to platform other people who are making active change in society, and getting those organizations, Progressive Victory as well, to a place where they have relative prominence, given the small audience that I have, the small impact that I can make on the world in, you know, however long I am on this earth. That's what I see as the more productive way to conduct an online media leftist space. So.
I think, just as a quick comment, I feel like we do matter. I think we matter quite a bit. I think more than we give ourselves credit for. Like, you look at somebody like Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a billionaire, one of the wealthiest people on the planet. He still wanted more attention. He wanted to be president. He does everything for attention. You look at somebody like Andrew Tate, who most likely ran a sex trafficking ring for years and years, and it wasn't enough to have the tens of millions of dollars of Bugattis. He wanted to be a TikTok influencer. I think that at the end of the day, you know, money buys power and influence, and people that have money eventually seek that influence. That's something that we found a way in the YouTube world to short circuit. We have that influence. And I think for as much as we care about people on the ground doing real work, so many of these people would kill if they could have even 1/10 of the voice that we have in terms of directing our audiences towards those types of real world causes. I think one of the biggest kind of gravest sins that we've made kind of in liberal or left-leaning media over the past few decades has probably been Jon Stewart religiously adhering to this idea that I'm not here to inform people, I'm not here to educate people, I just do a political funny show that happens after, you know, Muppets that crank calls on phones. He used to repeat that line so many times, and I used to think for so long, like, it's true, why do people take Jon Stewart seriously? Like, he's just a comedian guy. Why are you so mad that he's not pressing politicians or being more serious about his job? He's literally on Comedy Central. But then I look back and I think, how many millennials' sole source of political education came from The Daily Show? How many of you guys watched a lot of The Daily Show? I don't know what the age is. Okay. Like, it's as silly as it is, as much as I call it edutainment, it's really important. We shape a lot of people's lives. We shape a lot of people's minds. We aim a lot of them in certain political ways. I think it's important that, I agree that at the end of the day, like, we're just talkers. But I mean, like, I don't want to make a Hitler analogy with Wash up here, but, you know, at the end of the day, like, talking is a really important thing. Like, you influence, you capture people's ears, hearts, minds, and you aim them in a certain political way. And I think that to do that in a responsible and effective way is probably one of the most important things that anybody can do in the world, especially an influencer.
Yeah, so
I aspire to your level of confidence, Destiny, truly.
So I agree that the microphones you all hold are important, and at Progressive Victory, we're taking people from the streaming audience that are directed at us and mobilizing them for change, and it's been a great ride. We're doing it so far, and we have big plans for 2024. If you want to get involved, you can go to progress.win and sign up. Jump into our Discord. We have a couple questions here, a couple minutes for questions, if anyone wants to take audience questions. Oh, we have audience questions that have been collected. Oh, never mind. Okay, one more thing. Okay, before we get to questions, I just want to say one more time thank you to Brianna Wu, who's sick right now, and is just basically assembled this panel you see before you, and has been such a moving force in organizing all the events that we're doing, and I'm so happy and proud to be working with her. I want to thank all the other influencers we have in the audience, and especially Kyla Turner for helping us put together and research these the questions that we asked these panelists today, and I really want to thank all the audience members for being here. All right, let's take a couple minutes of audience questions. Huh?
Hello.
Hello.
Howdy. My name is Brendan, and I have one thing. I already talked to Vosh and Emma offline, but I have a thing for you, Destiny. I just want to let you know that you were my first. You were my first foray into this streaming world of lefty politics. Before you, I love the wit of Change My Mind and Ben Shapiro's online content.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, for my poor husband in 2015 had to deal with it. Your business while simultaneously advocating for a better world helped to change my mind drastically. And your on-the-ground work in Omaha inspired me to volunteer at my local Democrat board back when I lived in the Panhandle of Florida and get involved a lot more at the ground level. So, Bob and Emma, I already talked to you. Thank you so much. But Destiny, thank you for being an inspiration for the real work you've done in everything politically.
Thank you very much.
So we spoke a little bit here on the importance of being involved in local politics. So I wanted to ask each of the panelists, what responsibility, if any, do you have as content creators in promoting more local politics in your streams and local involvement in more direct ways and examples? And do you think a large focus on national issues on your streams and content hurts local involvement by your audiences?
Certainly. Like, I do think that. And we try our best, right, to highlight issues, say, you know, the Ohio ballot referendum vote, right, that happened a few weeks ago, or other smaller special elections. We'll try to highlight those, but for the most part, it is hard, right? It's hard to get local, especially because we have a national audience, and so we get complaints, for example, since we're in Brooklyn, like, we have focused a probably disproportionate amount on New York State politics compared to other states. So it is a balance, right? But I think, you know, directing people to say their local DSA chapter or something like that is a way to at least augment that just a little bit.
Yeah, I think at the local level, it's mostly about process rather than specific cases. Sometimes there's a local thing you can point at. It's real important. But of course, with an international audience, you focus international, then it's the national, and then it's the state, and then it's the city. And it can be done, but it's tough. So I think it's also important to promote, like, general practices. You know, maybe you're not there for every important local election, but you can say, hey, you know, regardless of where you live, this is how you really annoy a city councilman. And you do that enough times, and you might actually change something.
Last question, folks.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything they said. Like, showing people that you can do local action is really important. Showing local action on your own is important. But as was also said, we do national or international news coverage. So it's really hard as a streamer or YouTuber to pinpoint on that local action.
So I know that the progressive movement is for progressive organization, right? Progressive. I'm sorry. They're looking for local electors to move forward and do things. And I know that the school board is one of the most local elections that you can get into. What are sort of the progressive policies that you're looking for electors to hold if you're trying to help them back, or trying to identify electors to move forward in school board?
In school board elections?
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point, a really great question, honestly, because the right is, I gave that example earlier, right? The right's incredibly united around censorship and on essentially doxing and outing teachers if they're LGBTQ. So be the opposite of that. Be clear-eyed and essentially saying, no censorship. Sexual education for children is the best way to protect them from being molested or abused in certain ways. Being clear about that, promoting policies and being militant, saying, I'm the one protecting children. You're the one leaving them susceptible to potentially being abused with this censorship of sexual education. That is, I would say, where I would start in terms of a platform on a school board election. That if you want to get involved locally, I think that's a great way to get involved.
Also, piggybacking off of that, I don't know if it's the school board themselves that does it or if it comes from higher up, but man, lunches for kids is like one of the most no-brainer policies I've ever heard of in my entire life. Why would you want kids at school to be hungry? It's also like one of the few things that, that and I think air conditioning in hot areas that has like quite a bit of data that supports that these are things that are just universally better for kids. So people that support making your schools like temperature-wise hospitable for the children and then providing food for children are two of the most important things I think that you can have for kids.
I agree with them.
Supporting teachers unions.
Yes, supporting teachers unions. You're not just pro-labor if you don't like teachers unions. Go on, sorry.
No, I just want to close the panel, so that was a welcome comment. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the participants for coming here and being here today. We're so excited to be here with you, and thank you to Vidcon for having us.
Thank you all for coming out. I hope you've had a wonderful day so far.
Thank you.